Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to BIOMED EXPO in Las Vegas 2024. Streamers or future people who watch this, we thank you for sharing our information with your communities and come to our events. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen here who join us. And we have a great guest and a gold sponsor of BIOMED EXPO. Thank you for coming, Mr. Paul Harris, and give him a good hand. He's been most of his life researching on different technologies in healing. And how many years?
Oh, since I was a small child.
And he does business between Canada here and Europe, correct?
Yeah. All over the world, yeah.
All over the world.
All over the world.
So you ship anywhere in the world?
Yeah.
So the audience,
Almost.
the streamers, you should know that he can ship his plasma tubes and the systems he has for healing. He will explain anywhere in the world. And your website is?
THERAPHIofficial.com.
Yeah. THERAPHI.
Yeah.
That's a P in Latin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Greek, yeah.
Greek, yeah. So with saying that, we start his presentation. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, David. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Las Vegas. You hear me now? Okay. Yeah. Good morning. Welcome to Las Vegas. We're going to talk a little bit about the THERAPHI today. And how many people have actually tried the THERAPHI? So, fair number. Yeah, it's really good. This is exciting to be here. And we're at the BIOMED EXPO in Las Vegas 2024. And just a bit about myself. I consider myself basically a philosopher of nature and an electrician. And I use the word electrician because that's what the original people who studied the phenomenon of electricity called themselves, all the way from ancient times up to, it'd be people entertaining royal courts, and they did parlor tricks with electrostatic electricity and did a lot of things. So even Nikola Tesla and Steinmetz and people like that, they before there was such a thing as electrical engineers, and that they considered themselves electricians. And my primary focus in my research has been about energy and medicine, basically. And food. These are the three things that I think we really need to be able to take back our sort of sovereignty, and energy seems to be a thing that we're held captive by because it's expensive to produce energy the way we have been doing things for a long time. And we're going to see today that we're on the verge of discovering whole new ways of creating energy very cheap. And also these aspects, as with the THERAPHI, have these healing modalities. And food, of course, I do a bunch of stuff with sustainable agriculture, electroculture, and anything ways of being able to produce more food and to be able to feed everybody. And I was going through some old photos the other day, and I actually found a few old photos of my lab when I was a kid. And I've been working on high voltage systems and stuff like that ever since I took my parents' TV set apart when I was a young kid. And I knew that they always said, oh, don't take it apart because there's capacitors in there and they hold a charge and you got to be real careful, it can zap you and kill you, basically. So I took a keen interest into electronics at a young age. I always wanted to have a chemistry set. And my parents always said, oh, no, we're not going to get you a chemistry set. Every time came to my birthday or Christmas or something, hello, maybe it's the switch here.
That's good.
I asked for a chemistry set, and they said, no, you're not going to get you a chemistry set. We're going to get you something else because you'll blow yourself up with a chemistry set. So they ended up getting me an electronics kit from Radio Shack, and that's kind of how I got into electronics at a young age, and I built all kinds of radio transmitters and receivers and different circuits that were in there. And then I started experimenting with high voltage, and so these were some early Kirlian photographs that I had taken in the old school way. You put a high voltage plate and with actual old style film on the plate that you would have in a camera, and expose the film with the high voltage around it. And that's a picture of a leaf and my fingers. And what you're seeing in here is the electric charge discharge that's coming through the film and surrounding your body. So this idea of that we have a aura or a biofield around our body, when it's amped up with higher voltage, it becomes quite visible, and you could get different colors, and you see the plasma basically acting in different ways around your fingertips. And then in the early 90s, I read a book by Barry Loynes called The Cancer Cure That Worked. It was about Royal Raymond Rife. And I started building Rife machines using RF amplifiers and tuning the antennas to, instead of sending a signal into a big antenna and talking to somebody in Japan on the other side of the world, which this little guy had enough power to do, you drive the RF signal into a plasma tube. And basically we would pump square waves in there. And the idea was that you could hit certain resonant frequencies and destroy viruses and bacteria, even within the body. Somehow these waves had a way of penetrating into the body and doing that.
Oh, that's you?
Yeah, that's me years ago at a trade show. And there's the book, The Cancer Cure That Worked. And so this was some early versions of the type of tubes I was making back then. And it was funny because back then people didn't know a lot about things. They didn't know a lot about Rife. People didn't even know a lot about Tesla. Before the days of the internet, when I was a kid in school and I asked my teachers about Tesla, they were like, oh, well, he invented a motor or something like that, but don't worry about him. You want to study Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison was a great inventor, and you should look at him. And so anytime I discovered a certain character through the years, that we're going to go through some of them, it's like their information had been purposely suppressed. And whenever somebody told me not to look there, I flipped over that rock and looked there. And it's amazing what you find. And there's a reason for those things were suppressed. So people that then, they said, the human body has nothing to do with electricity. What are you saying with these, electronic devices that can affect the body? They can't affect the body in any way. They called it pseudoscience. They said you're crazy and all these kind of things. But I had this innate feeling, because I just also studied a lot of esoteric philosophy and religion over the years, and understood that there's much more to this physical body than just a skin sac to hold a physical body together. We are basically light beings, and we are living in this organic matter, and we're made up of all these, trillions of cells. And interestingly enough, only 1/10 of those cells are actually human cells. The other 90% of them are other things. And so we're made up of bacteria, viruses, fungi, and they all live in this symbiotic relationship. Inside of our body, even in every cell, we have mitochondria, and we can have, hundreds to thousands of mitochondria in each cell. Those mitochondria have their own DNA as well. So they're completely separate from us. At some time, we made a deal where the mitochondria agreed to work with us so they could get around, and they provided us energy to actually get around. So we work together in a symbiotic relationship. So that's just on a physical level. Then there's the whole etheric side of the body, what we call auras, and the idea of consciousness, really. We have this bio field around us, and everything is not existing on these things from emotions, memories, thoughts, and consciousness itself on a physical level. We keep thinking, oh yeah, it's in the brain. Somehow this brain's wired to have all that stuff in there. But it's actually in a field around the body, and this is what we mean by these bioactive fields. And these fields are all basically of different forms of plasma. And what we're going to see tonight is that how to affect these plasma fields around the body and what these effects can do to your physical body, and just understanding nature in general, because that's really what it's all about. So my whole thing is understanding nature and trying to come up with ways of making nature working in harmony with nature to make nature work better for ourselves. We seem to have this mentality of we got to hammer things and do things in mechanical ways, and everything's mechanical, so you got to use brute force to do all these things. Instead of looking at nature, we go against nature. We build our structures in square shapes when squares don't exist very much in nature. Nature is made up of spirals and curves. And so we do things the hard way, like oil and gas, for instance. We suck the oil out of the earth to run our cars, and these internal combustion systems that use the energy from the gas, and there's a high density amount of chemical energy in the gasoline, and that's why we use it. But we're going to see today that there's much better ways. So lightning is a really good example of plasma, and one arc of lightning like this can provide enough energy to run an entire city for a whole year. And so we're surrounded by energy. If there was a way to actually capture it and utilize it and trickle feed it, the problem with why we can't just put a big power supply antenna underneath the lightning bolt is because it would fry everything we have that we have physically in existence. To be able to contain that field, you would need such a massive capacitor to be able to quickly charge. And when you dump that much current into something, it basically destroys it. And if there was a way to capture this energy in a bottle and slowly release it, that would be the key. Because we live in an infinite sea of energy. There's nothing but energy. All of this, our entire universe is all made up. It's an electrical universe, as we're going to see today. So this whole idea of people back in those days also said, oh, you're crazy, these free energy ideas. There's no free lunch, the second law of thermodynamics and all these things. But it really comes down to a misunderstanding of what energy and power really is. And some people just were smart enough to put a meter on it and charge you for it. We built all these systems starting with Nikola Tesla and Niagara Falls hydroelectric dams, and so we all know the Tesla story, and how his financiers basically didn't want him to give away free energy, which he was had all the plans for, and he started building the Wardenclyffe Tower because they realized they couldn't put a meter on it and charge you for it. And nowadays we even have smart meters, so they got even smarter, and smart meters are capable of interfacing through the Internet of Things with all the appliances, so they'll be able to keep data and have control over all the appliances you have in your house, your cars, electric cars, and everything like that. But basically, when you get down to the fundamentals of biology, physics, and chemistry, it's all about charge. And all these interactions between these particles that we deal with all the time and the forces that are upon them all deal with this phenomenon that we call the electric charge. So we live in an electric universe, and you've heard a million times that the universe is 99.9% plasma, maybe even more, 99.999. It's arguable, but there's way more plasma in the entire universe than there is solid matter. And so someday I envision this idea that you will be able to have all the energy you need for your entire life in a small suitcase. And you'll get that suitcase-sized box when you're born, and that will run your car, it'll run your house, it'll run all the energy needs you need for the future. And plasma is the key to understanding that, and that's why there has not been much information taught on plasma and these kind of highly energetic things that Tesla and people like that were working with, because not only is it capable of interfacing with the body, but it's also capable of providing unlimited amounts of energy. And so the thing is the reason why we don't have it today, for the most part, because once you have a suitcase like that, you have that much power, you could use it for evil purposes. So you could make it very destructive, because as you know, with the lightning and that, electricity can be very destructive. So it has its healing modalities, and it can be very complementary to life, accelerate growth and provide longevity for all life forms, because nature basically runs on it. But when you have that much energy, if you release that much power at once, it can be very destructive. So our problem is that we're still killing each other, basically. So it's part of the conscious evolution that we are at the brink of right now, where we have to come to this understanding. If we want to live in a world where we have this free energy and extend our lifetimes well beyond, 100 years, there's old stories of people that lived in ancient cultures and lived for long times. We can have all that, but in order for us to get there, we're just going to have to stop being mean to each other. So really, this is all about the evolution of consciousness. And I'm going to say a lot more about the THERAPHI today than I've ever said before, because it's a lot more than just a healing machine. The healing effects that we're receiving from the THERAPHI are really just a small side effect. And the basic underlying principles behind it, as you're going to see for the first time, has a lot more to do with it. And I like to call it a consciously assisted technology, because plasma in itself has sort of a key to interlock between signals and solid matter into what we call, our aura and our spiritual side of our body, and beyond the physical effects. And so basically what the THERAPHI is two sets of plasma tubes. In this case, we generally run one, but you can add more. And it creates different fields. These create toroidal fields around them. And one spins clockwise around one side, the other one spins counterclockwise, and you lie in between them. And there's also a large Tesla coil underneath the bed that creates another toroidal field around you. So it's interacting mix between these toroidal fields and the photonic emission from the plasma that your body absorbs like a sponge. So we have light all throughout our entire body, and the light's been called biophotonics. And so this THERAPHI uses all those mediums into one device. And it's actually been 10 years. So THERAPHI has been around a lot, and a long time. We've gathered tons of anecdotal evidence. I haven't talked much about it over the years, because it's the kind of thing where I was waiting for a point in time where I guess people caught up where they weren't talking, bad about the electromedicine and things like that, saying, oh, it's just crazy pseudoscience. And I think we're there. I think so. The fact that you guys are all here, it's amazing. Thank you. Yeah. So now we can tell a little bit more of the story. And it's exciting because even academia is catching up now. So it's on the latest cutting edge research when we see people like, NASA and people like that are fully talking about plasma and its benefits and people understanding it. And same with Nikola Tesla. Like he said in his time that, I'm 100 years ahead of my time. Everything I'm doing is for 100 years from now. Well, we're here now. It's 100 years ahead of the time. And finally, we can start to understand what he was talking about all this time. So the bioactive field produced in the THERAPHI enables one to achieve a deep state of relaxation. In this relaxed state, the body has the potential to stabilize the flight or fight response, relaxes the vagus nerve, reduce cortisol levels, improve blood flow, support the body's natural healing tendencies. And relaxing the vagus nerve is particularly important because it regulates digestion and gut function, modulates the heart rate and blood pressure, influences the immune system response, controls breathing and respiration, interacts with the brain-gut axis to maintain overall health. And we know now that there's a lot more to what's going on in your gut because a big part of who you are and everything is, like I said, all those microbes and everything inside of us. And they are all conscious as well. And they all have a big influence on you and the interaction they produce, all the chemicals for your brain to run on, and everything works together in the system. So one good thing that when it comes to healing is when pets and animals are sensitive to it and they know what's going on. And one thing about the THERAPHI is if you have a cat or a dog or anything, they'll jump right up on the center of the table and they'll sit right in the sweet spot in the middle. And so, yeah, this little guy's getting his treatment and they just love it. So they understand that there's some benefits to being there. But like I said, more than just the underlying principles behind the THERAPHI have a lot more to do with than these healing modalities. And it has to do with energy production, actually creating energy from matter and converting matter into energy. So we can do material transmutations and manifestations, actually do transmutations of elements on the periodic tables from one to another. And the other interesting anomaly is field propulsion, or what's commonly called anti-gravity. And we're going to try to bring up some of that stuff tonight, because what better place to do it here at the BIOMED EXPO with the alien event next door. So, everybody's talking about the medbed. Medbed's a big thing these days. And I like to say that, there was people calling THERAPHI medbed a long time ago. And one of the interesting things about it is they're referring to it as a medbed, but it's not a medical device. It's an experimental research device. But it is like one of the original med beds, I suppose you could call it. And some people say the med is short for meditation. So it's a meditation bed, and it's not a medical device. So I'm going to make that clear. It's an experimental research device that comes with this main amplifier and the two tubes and the large coil that wasn't in that picture. But everything's based on phi ratio. This particular tube design, I went through many variations, and everything in the THERAPHI is based on, because everything's based on nature, it's all based on phi ratio. And so this pentagon and pentagram are the perfect representation of the ratio 1 to 0.618 ad infinitum. And so we see these shapes everywhere in nature, and these are very key degrees. For instance, this 108 degrees is the actual water molecule with the oxygen here, and the two hydrogen atoms are at 108 degrees, and that bond angle can stretch plus or minus 15 degrees. So that's why we can form all kinds of different geometries with water. And THERAPHI interacts with water, and our water bodies are 90% water, and that has a lot to do with it. It has a lot to do with the hydrogen. We just set up a new website, and Brendan Amelani and the whole team, we've increased the THERAPHI team because everything up to now has kind of been grassroots and word of mouth. I've never actually had a website or a Facebook page or any of those things that people have been doing. I was a web developer in the early days. I took the internet from 1.0 to 2.0, and I saw everything that was coming and understood what was going to go on. And nowadays we have social media and everything running our lives, and in my opinion, it's been great to unify the whole world and everybody communicate together, but it's also been unfortunate that everybody can't get along. You just got to get along when you're on there and be nice to each other. So TheraphiOfficial.com is the new website, and in here we have all the practitioner locations. And so a bit of background about THERAPHI itself. The logo itself, shortly after coming up with the name THERAPHI, I was thinking, it's a lot like those tubes at Dendera in the Temple of Hathor. So I used that as the logo. And it's interesting, people say, oh yeah, those were all kinds of different stories about them or whatever they were, but the one main theory was that they're actually light bulbs, and this was a symbolism of energy. The serpent is a symbol of wisdom and ancient power and knowledge and energy. So inside those tubes, they drew the serpents like that, and some people believe that's what they actually used and were creating lighting. And so I played around with a lot of different plasma tubes, and I was able to recreate one of those serpents in the tube. You can see he's got his head, and he curves like a serpent, and it even has a tail like a snake that you can see down here. This, what's happening in the side of this plasma, these are called solitons, and they're evenly dispersed packets of compression and rarefaction within the plasma. So one of the things that they call, the reason why plasma has this name and this idea is that it conforms to shape and space, and so everything in the entire universe actually comes from plasma, and everything was created through plasma. So it's an important part, and the way the THERAPHI works is it creates these scalar waves, and we're going to explain to you what scalar physics and what scalar waves actually are these days, because a lot of that word's been bantered around for a long time in this sort of electromedical community, and even in all other things, and everybody's got scalar this, scalar that, and they say, well, you can't measure a scalar field, so therefore a scalar applies to whatever I got, whether it's TV sets or pendants or whatever. But we're going to tell you what scalar physics really is and what scalar energy really is. So what's happening here is a collapse of phases that are happening, and these phases cancel each other out. The E fields and the B fields, so the electric field and the magnetic field collapse into counter space, and that's what you're seeing in here. So when you're on the THERAPHI, your body is this capacitor that's part of the circuit, and because of the different densities in your tissues, it's a nonlinear capacitor, so we have different densities from bone that's very hard to soft tissues, the spongy tissues inside of the bones that produce all your white blood cells, and cartilage and all that. So your body is basically a nonlinear capacitor, and that word is important, and you're part of this circuit. So I played with a lot of tubes over the years. Originally my idea was to have one big plasma tube that you rolled into, sort of like an MRI, and the bed rolled in, but that was just economically not feasible. Of course, if you see all my past talks, I talked a lot about Anton Perori and the Perori device, and he had very large tubes. And so this kind of simplified it by separating the tubes and using what's called a single wire transmission to light these tubes, and Tesla did a lot of work with this. And it works quite well. So this current rendition is all based a little more phi ratio built into it. I started off with these tubes just because I had them in the lab. But my idea here was to get this twist in here to get the vortexes going. So the plasma itself is forming a fractal antenna that has braids within braids. So the braids start here, and these three things braid into each other, and they twist together, because everything in nature is formed in this manner. You know, when you dip your spoon into your coffee cup and the cream swirls just like this in two vortex pairs, vortex and anti-vortex. This is the key to pretty well everything, as we're starting to realize, and what you're going to see today. The ancients knew it, and that's the other thing. All this stuff is not new technology. The ancients did things in stone because they wanted it to be around long enough. They knew that, you know, if they wrote things on paper, the paper was going to be long gone, so they created and built in stone, and all these things are right before your very eyes. We see them in all ancient cultures. So this is called an ionic column. And interestingly enough, the ions is what plasma is basically. It's separating atoms into their subatomic particles. So you get ions that are stripped of electrons, and they have positive charge, and you have clouds of electrons. And then they call this the capital, and the capital is where it all happens. And so they're showing you right before your very eyes where it goes down. So the THERAPHI energy travels in these, what Tesla called standing columnar waves. And these are basically longitudinal waves. They're being emitted from the tubes. And you can see quite clearly in this fluorescent tube that there's a longitudinal wave coming this way, and they converge into this counter space, this 0 point, right here at your dantian where you're laying on the table. I've been able to create those waves here. These ones are perfect pancakes in phi ratio within the tubes. And you can see how the plasma is conscious itself. So many things in this world, everything is conscious. And the alchemists and the ancients all said this. And we think today, oh yeah, we're the smartest ones on this planet, and we're the only conscious beings. And what is consciousness anyway? And well, the ancients said that everything is conscious and everything just lives in its own particular timeline, like rocks and things like that live for, you know, millions of years, and we're just here for a blink of an eye. But you can see how the plasma interacts with my hand because it's conscious and it's able to understand and communicate, and it eats electricity, and it eats energy, and it eats things from the sun. So a lot of these healing devices over the years kind of started out with Nikola Tesla when he found that in his laboratory he had all kinds of healing effects from his high voltage systems. So one of the first early ones was a violet ray tube that basically used Tesla's high voltage technology in these vacuum tubes to create plasma, and they had all kinds of different shapes for different orifices and things like that, and they really worked. They got really suppressed though. It was one of the early ones. Anybody that made these kind of devices back over the years, because if you go back, and I've collected all these medical research books and everything, and the real fundamentals behind medicine and that, when they started forming the American Medical Association and the modern day medical world. Once the pharmaceutical companies who didn't have a job after World War II creating, you know, biological weapons and things like that in chemical warfare, they started getting their foot in the door, and they started suppressing all this technology. So all those old books all had electrical ways of healing the body. But they kind of slivered that off and split it off, and today, all modern electrical devices are diagnostic devices. So heart, EEGs for monitoring your brain waves and everything, but they aren't doing treatments or healing with them. They're just doing diagnostics. And so all these healing and tools have disappeared. But they're starting to come back. And one thing that's a big buzzword now is this cold atmospheric plasma. A lot of people are calling the THERAPHI cold atmospheric plasma, but it's not. It's cold plasma, yeah, but it's not atmospheric. That's the key to it. So what they're talking about here is, of course, it has antibacterial effects, and it can heal wounds and do all these amazing things. But this is an open atmosphere. So when you actually expose your body to in an open atmosphere as atmospheric plasma. So the THERAPHI is using cold plasma, but it's trapped in the vacuum tube. However, that plasma field gets affected all the way around it, and that's how it works. It's a lot more subtle. I like to call it the most powerful subtle energy machine ever. So I always like to go back to history and where all these things came from, because all the keys are back there. All the original people who were investigating these things, you know, were right on, bang on, and a lot of their information got skewed and suppressed, as we're going to see over the years. So Michael Faraday was an early experimenter who had a quite extensive lab, and he came up with a lot of things and discovered a lot about magnetics and how magnets and electric fields corresponded. And he was actually the first to discover what we call today like HHO and Brown's gas and all these things. But let's give credit to where it's due. Is actually Michael Faraday, who did the first electrolysis system and split water into hydrogen and oxygen. And James Clerk Maxwell was basically a mathematician who realized that you know, we wanted to describe these principles that Faraday was doing it with mathematics, and how do we explain it. And he used like fluid dynamics concepts to explain the electromagnetism. And he wrote these formulations, these are quaternions initially, and he had 20 of them, 20 equations and 20 unknowns, and these are really key. But this is a very old form of mathematics before algebra and everything was kind of formalized, and it's kind of it went out of you know, popularity back in his time, and this was the end of it, and became converted into modern algebra and stuff like this. But you can see he had a lot more things. What he was looking at was potential and the scalar components, and this is where all the scalar information is here, and how to understand the scalar physics, because it came down to underlying fields behind things, as we're going to see. But you know, it was very complicated math, and there wasn't a lot of people, really. There was very few. There was maybe about really 12 to 20 really good electricians at that time who were able to do that kind of mathematics and understand electricity in its physical working sense. But then Oliver Heaviside came along and said, you know, this is all way too complicated, and what are we talking about these potentials for and everything like that? Because all we're interested in is the vectors, and we don't want scalar you know, components, because they don't really mean anything. We're more interested in the interaction. So he simplified Maxwell's equations down to 4 simple equations with modern algebra, because he was a big part of finalizing how that worked. And so there it is. This is what we're taught today, stripped down version, which you can explain the electromagnetic interactions and stuff like this very simply and very fast and very efficiently. And that's kind of what people like to do, so they did. And so Sir William Crookes was an amazing fellow, and he actually came up with this term. He discovered plasma, really, and called it radiant matter. And Tesla called it radiant matter too, because of Crookes. Crookes was Tesla's sort of mentor in all of this. So Crookes made the first plasma tube. Basically, this became the vacuum tube. This became the CRT tube in your television set, cathode ray tube. And it all started with this man. And he actually was a real spiritualist, and back in that day it was very popular to try to interface with the other worlds and the other side, and they did all kinds of spiritual type things and stuff like that. So people, you know, this day he gets a bad rap for that, because they didn't understand that there's a deep interconnection between all this. And Tesla did as well. He understood this connection, and he was a physical, practical, hands-on researcher who was just phenomenal and came up with what we know as alternating currents today. He was quite a showman, and he understood the scalar components that were happening in his systems, And even though he didn't have the wording and the languaging for it, when you read his old texts, he clearly, talks about radiant energy and the healing properties and its ability to transmit power at a distance without any wires, and all these amazing things. And when he built the Wardenclyffe Tower, he'd say things like electric power is everywhere, present in unlimited quantities, and we can drive the world's machinery without the need for coal, oil, gas, or any of the other common fuels. And what he had built here was all based on scalar physics, and basically he was creating a scalar wave that was pumped into the Earth, because you're only seeing a small part of this. This terminal on top of the Earth is really only a small part of what he was doing at Wardenclyffe. There was a big well and all these mine shafts, at Wardenclyffe and Long Island, and that's why he built this place there. And it went down and it spread out in all different directions, and he ran miles of thick copper into all these directions, and it was below the sea level of water, so he had a really good ground plane. And basically he was pumping phase conjugate waves into the Earth and gaining energy from all the geomagnetic stress, because inside the core of the Earth is where there's tons of unlimited energy as well, just coincidentally enough, just like we see in volcanoes and the power and the heat and the lava and the Earth's momentum and all of that stuff could be harnessed and then rebroadcast out to the top and be received. But once J.P. Morgan and that realized that he couldn't put the meter on it, like we saw earlier, that ended that sort of deal, and they blew up the tower, unfortunately. Before that, interesting enough, I was out there, and there were, old timers saying, "Oh yeah, they made a skating rink up at the top of there. We used to go up there and skate around in the winter," like crazy stories like that. But basically, the way Tesla is charging these Tesla coils is like small little pushes of energy. If you take a child and you try to push them on a swing all the way up high, you exert a lot of force. But if you just tap little bits, as you do with a child on the swing, you realize you build up that momentum. And that's a good way you have to look at it. Irving Langmuir is the one who actually gave the term plasma to plasma, because he thought it looked a lot like blood plasma. Because it conformed to shape and it seemed to have this intelligence. And they all talked about that the plasma, it reacted to you and it could interact with that. So he experimented a lot with the plasma tubes. And another person that gave me great insight into a lot of this, of course, is Walter Russell. And he's starting to come back on the scene now. I see even, mainstream media people talking about him and stuff. So it's great to see a lot of these people who've been sort of their information, really underground kind of people knew about these people and studied this information, but it's starting to come out into the public. And thank you all for getting tuned into all this. So Walter Russell said, "In the wave lies the secret to creation, therefore know the wave." And then, of course, there was Rife, and this is one of his RF pump Rife machines that basically had a plasma tube here. This amplifier was designed by Richard Hoyland, who was one of his engineers. And we all know the Rife story. I'm just going to buzz through a lot of these guys because I've done lots of talks over the years on details of these people. Another great influence, my early studies was Wilhelm Reich, of course, and he had the terms orgone energy, that he was accumulating this mysterious energy and can capture it in a box, and this box is basically a capacitor made up with inorganic and metallic material to capture energy that he called orgone energy, and he talked about bions, and we're going to see a little bit more. But I'm going to start to introduce some new characters in the story of the THERAPHI. And this here is Winston Bostick, who was a plasma physicist who worked for the U.S. Military and basically was a plasma researcher and understanding plasma phenomenon. And a lot of his writings are very obscure and hard to find, if you can find them or any references to him at all. But it became a big deal in his day when he realized that he could create these sort of cosmic type galactic structures in these little microplasmas in the laboratory in a test tube. And the story was, wow, he's creating a whole universe inside a test tube. And this was in the media, it was in the news and things like that. And it was, kind of common knowledge and very exciting at the time. But quickly after, when they understood the implications and the things of what they were doing, because he worked for the military, and of course the first thing they think of, wow, what a great weapon we can make out of this. So that's the thing, why all this stuff's been suppressed, and all the scalar information, everything like that, because it pertains to a lot of things, like you can make more powerful weapons than nuclear bombs with this type of energy. And so here's some of the different ways. What he was doing was shooting these toroidal plasmas at different angles and things, and he started off with the 2 that you saw there, and then he had 4, and then 3, and 5, 6, and he added them. And what they did is these little plasma toroids kind of converge together, and they circle around each other, and they started to form these little toroidal donuts. So this is why the toroid is such an important shape. And he wrote about it, and he called these things plasmoids. And so he coined the term plasmoids, and it's basically, the word means it's a combination of plasma and magnetic. It's a plasma and magnetic entity that creates these fields. And the plasma is emitted, that's what he said, not as an amorphous blob, but in the forms of a torus. And we shall take the liberty of calling this toroidal structure a plasmoid, a word which means plasma magnetic entity. The word plasmoid will be employed as a generic term for plasma magnetic entities. And they are everywhere. Remember, 99.9% of the universe. So if 99.99% of the universe is plasma, then all our laws of physics and everything that we know about, and all our material matter and all our science and everything like that, is only less than 0.1% of what really is. So we're looking in the wrong corner of the cosmos here until we understand this. So this is a dusty plasma where there's all these plasmoids that are organized around you, and they fall into coherence and in these patterns, and the underlying matrix of what they called the ether back then. What Crookes said was, or what Maxwell rather said was that all these effects, these forces, have an effect on the medium, which he meant the ether. So we have to kind of understand that ether principles to go back that. But we're surrounded by these plasmoids. Our whole aura, some people can see auras. We can detect them with things like the Kirlian photographs and everything like that. It's all made up of plasma. All the cells in our body are continuously shedding off of our body. We basically shed off for about 1.2 million different bacteria and billions of viruses and things like that continuously all day long, so per hour. And they're all held in this energetic field around our body that we call the aura today. So these condensed plasmas, charge clusters, exotic vacuum objects, or as Bob Grenier likes to call them, the fractal toroidal moment. These are all sort of words for the same thing. These are energy clusters, and they're quasi-stable formations. They consistently are present all around us, but fundamental science, as a rule, doesn't even notice or acknowledge them. And it's a big part of the big picture. Again, we're only looking at physical matter and physical interactions, but we're not understanding. So Crookes and Tesla called them radiant energy. Wilhelm Reich called them orgone energy and bions. Ken Shoulders called them charge clusters. Later he called them exotic vacuum objects to give them more a name. And so people gave them various different names. And a lot of Russian researchers, because the Russians have been light years ahead of us on all this technology, they called them things like ectons or erzons, or the Kozyrev Dirac monopoles, Lochak monopoles. And in everyday life, we kind of know it all the time as static electricity. We build up this charge, and when you touch the doorknob, you get zapped, right? So understanding these things, and Bob Grenier is an amazing guy who's been talking a lot about this lately, and he studied low energy nuclear reactions. And we just did a conference together in Prague. We did an alchemy workshop in Prague in John D. and Edward Kelly's castle in the basement, where it kind of all started back then. And then we did the second advanced energy symposium where we showed before 30 people basically how to do low energy nuclear reactions and transmutations in your kitchen in 5 different ways. So it was quite exciting. And basically the alchemists, talked about these kind of things, and to understand alchemy and how all these things kind of came from this underlying thing has always been there, hidden in plain sight. And the 3 principles of sulfur, salt, and mercury relate to these fundamental forces and building into the elements. So everything kind of comes from nothing, and then from the chaos, the original matter splitting into duality nature that we live in. So the electric field and the magnetic field, and then the primal forces into energy, and all the way concentrating down to the center of the earth, where it reflects back off the center of the earth, provides every life with all the energy it needs. And the philosophical, ancient philosophers and alchemists and all this, they understood a lot of these principles, and we're just coming to understand them with modern sense. So what we're taught in school is, these solid states of matter, solids, liquid, and gases, and now plasma, the 4th state of matter that everybody's excited about, is for good reason, because not only is it the 4th state of matter, it's also the 1st state of matter, because everything comes from plasma. So in the early days, there was all these tales of, and some people saw these ball lightning, big spheres of plasma that would come down or come right through your wall, because it can go right through any kind of matter and remain coherent in its form. And there was all these ancient stories and fables of the ball lightning would come down the chimney and come inside your house. And the stories of, the old lady who was sweeping her floor, and she chases this ball lightning out with her broom. Get out, get out, get out. And it responds. And it bounces around and heads for the door and poof, disappears. So one of the unfortunate incidents is that shortly after Benjamin Franklin was flying his kite to do the discovery of electricity, and in that story is this poor Georg Reichmann in Russia basically tried to do the same experiment, made the mistake of bringing the kite into his house, the string, and form of ball lightning formed and came down and killed him. Basically, he was the first one to actually, electrical experimenter, to die of electricity, and the ball lightning left a big burn mark in his forehead and knocked him against the wall, and he died, unfortunately. Ball lightning, of course, was always considered, the weird phenomenon by modern science, and they're like, no, it doesn't really exist. There's no evidence of it, blah, blah, blah. For the longest time, they didn't believe in anything, but it can be created in the laboratory, and interesting enough, starts out as a ball and can easily form into historical shapes. So I've talked a bit about Christian Olaf, who is a Norwegian, Birkeland, who was a Norwegian, basically physicist who studied electromagnetic fields and the phenomenon of the aurora borealis and the plasma in the sky that we all see and have been witness to a lot, because the sun is continuously spewing out all these things that have an energetic phenomenon around the Earth. So he made models in the laboratory to simulate that with plasma. And what he said was the upper atmosphere and everything, there's matter coming into the Earth, and there's a high amount of energy, and there's perhaps millions of watts of power in every single streamer of plasma in the aurora borealis. And of course, scientists of the day said he was crazy and it had nothing to do with that, and they ridiculed him. And in the end, we now know that there is zillions of watts of power. As I say, we live in this infinite sea of energy and everything coming through the sun, and our Van Allen belt around the Earth is our little protective shield through cosmic radiation and all kinds of things, and all the emissions and protium and matter that actually come from the sun. So all the things that make up the protons come in streaming into the Earth. And I kind of like this idea of the expanding Earth theory. It's not that, there was a Pangea and all the continents are on one side of the planet and the rest was water. But the Earth is like a seed crystal that's been growing. It's a living being, living entity, that we are just like the microbes inside of our guts, that we are living on this planet, of a greater conscious planet. And the Egyptians said that too. Stars and suns and everything is sort of like a greater being. So the ancient stories about the ancients worshiping the sun have a lot more, they had a lot more greater understanding than we do. They weren't just worshiping the sun because it gave life and everything, but they understood these fundamentals. And everything in the universe is all connected together through these light tubes. When we see one of these X-class flares that we just had the other day, and we've been seeing the Aurora Borealis all the way down to Florida, and these are highly excited times. So part of the evolution, physical evolution of everything on the planet is a lot to do with the energetic forms coming from the sun. And so interestingly enough, one of these flares captured here seems to follow in these same patterns. We see these double helix spirals everywhere. So everything in the universe has sort of the scale invariant idea. It's fractal, it's recursive, so all the way down to your DNA, everything travels in these double helix strands. When you look at everything in life, it's all following these spirals. And these patterns repeat over and over again in the from the wide cosmic structure all the way down to the very fine molecular structure, all the way down into subatomic levels. And so we talk about these longitudinal waves with the THERAPHI, and this is just a good way to visualize a longitudinal wave, a standard Hertzian wave or electromagnetic wave is a sort of a sinusoidal wave that moves like this, but a longitudinal wave is kind of like a sound wave. It's a pressure wave. So it's pressure on the ether, and that's really what all these things are, as well as light. Our whole idea of this sort of concept of everything being, particles and everything like that. The particles are formed from convergence in waves, and understanding different types of waves is going to help us understand a lot of this. So we have the electromagnetic standard model where we understand that in electricity we have current and voltage and amperage, and the current from the amperage is at 90 degrees out of phase with the voltage. This kind of shows that really well. And these waves can be contained within waves. So you get waves upon waves upon waves upon waves. This is how everything is communicated through. So this is one of the light tubes of plasma interconnecting through the universe, and plasma forms this. Of course, a lot of the dark spots that you see all around here too are plasma as well. Not all plasma emits light. There's like this phase of plasma is called the dark plasma. And that's why we can't see the fields around our body and stuff like this. And they're also very small. These plasmoids can be, nanocluster size, very small, down to, a few 1,000 atoms or whatever. And they're all this plasma is basically atoms that are taken apart. So you have electrons, you have protons and neutrons that are making up the plasma, and they're not stuck together into this solid matter. And they like to travel in these currents and form toroidal structures because they always have these vortex pairs, anti-vortex, clockwise, counterclockwise, and toroids. So one good example of this is forming from aerodynamics, this sort of Kelvin idea of creating this is an air cannon that's basically shooting. You can fill these things with smoke and it'll shoot out these toroidal rings. And you see all these structures form into these little substructures around, and they can get very complex very quickly. Well, this is what can happen with the matter and everything as well. So it can start out as a sphere, and the sphere has starts to collapse in on itself. This would be an example of what cavitation is when your propeller is riding in your boat, and while your propeller gets eaten up, it's because it creates these bubbles, and you look down in the water and you see all these bubbles. Well, how do those bubbles have so much force that they can completely shred your propeller? And you look at the back of the boat and you see all these divots in there. That metal is basically disintegrated and disrupted and broken apart by these powerful energies that come from this bubble collapse through this sort of re-entry jet where it forms into these toroids. And so we see these toroids all the way down from these small nanostructures all the way up into cosmic structures in the universe. Over and over again, the pattern repeats. When these toroidal forms come together in massive formations like this, they tend to spew out electrons out of one side and protons out of the other, all the protium, so all the matter that is being created here basically and generated and spewed out. And the universe is continuously converting energy into matter and matter back into energy, and it's a breathing cycle. So this whole idea of entropy and the modern science idea that, oh yeah, well, we're trying to figure out when the universe is going to stop running because we know the law of entropy, everything just breaks down and grind to a halt eventually. But that can be furthest from the truth because they're only looking at one side of the coin. The other side is the negative entropy. And this is how it works, and this is how the universe is continuously taking these things and redoing them all the time. So that's what we're after when we're looking at the healing aspects of things like the THERAPHI, is that how do we increase this negative entropy and keep this life force and keep the order restored, because it's coherence, and it has to do with making coherent matter and providing energy and life force into it. And last year or two ago, Robert Temple wrote this amazing book called The New Science of Heaven, where he basically puts it all together. And a lot of the papers and stuff I had collected and people I studied over the years, he's kind of wrote this into this book, and it's absolutely phenomenal. If you want to have an understanding of this bigger picture, he's done an excellent job of putting it all together in this book, The New Science of Heaven. And, he basically says in there, if the universe is this 99.99% of the matter of the universe, then we live in a plasma universe, not a matter universe, and that, solids and liquids and gases and everything we think is reality is the exception to the norm. This is really rare to be here and very special. So we have to move to a plasma-centric understanding of ourselves and the universe, not a matter-centric Newtonian idea of this everything being a machine. But this gives us new insights into maintaining negative entropy, as I'm saying, in biological systems. Also to consciousness, memory, dreams, astral travel, the Akashic records, because all this is captured as light moves through time and space. Everything's there. Psychokinesis, telepathy, the soul, your soul, angels, demons, ghosts, just like the plasma balls can go through the walls, rematerialize, and heaven itself. So it's starting to get really cool, and we're really starting to figure this out. Also, this concept of very dense crystalline plasmas that can form amazingly strong and super dense crystalline plasma, solid crystal plasmas. And they talk about this in several of the papers that are referenced in the book. One of them, this one saying, complex plasmas may naturally self-organize themselves into stable, interacting helical structures that exhibit features normally attributed to organic living matter. So what they're saying here is that the plasma is a life form itself, and it consumes, it breeds, it multiplies, and it thinks, and it does all these things that we consider something that's conscious and living. So it's concluded that the complex self-organized plasma structures exhibit all the necessary properties to qualify them as candidates for inorganic living matter that may exist in space and provide certain conditions to allow them to evolve naturally. So this idea of these solid, dense, crystalline plasmas kind of reminds me of what Edgar Cayce said about in Atlantis. They had the two-eye stone that basically caused all the destruction. How could you, with that, remember I said that much power and energy and in one place you could cause a massive destruction. So perhaps that's what the two-eye stone was, a solid, living, condensed, crystalline plasma. So a few new characters to the story. Kenneth Radford Shoulders, who did a lot of amazing research and did some government work. And he discovered these things that he called exotic vacuum objects. He initially called them charge clusters, but they was, again, were these toroidal fields that were basically made up of positively charged or negatively charged, or a combination of neutral, positive, and negatively charged clusters of toroidal concentrations of condensed elements that have incredible speeds and can move through things. They can go straight through metal, and they can do massive destruction and rip things apart. They can rip matter apart, convert it into energy. They can form matter. Here's some electron scanning microscopes of how these things move into metal plates and things like that. And they do transmutations of the elements. All kinds of interesting work that he did that is pretty well, not very well known. And another one of these mysterious characters that experimented with a lot of this sort of energetic quality of high voltage electricities and the phenomenon behind them was T. Townsend Brown. And he worked for the US Navy as well and discovered all kinds of interesting gravitational effects and propulsion systems. When you can manipulate these fields, you understand that the B field, the magnetic field, the E field, the electric, and the one that they say we don't know anything about, the G field, gravity. We have no idea what gravity is or how it comes about. Nope, don't know anything there. When you start to understand what scalar physics is and get to the bottom of all this, you can understand how to manipulate all three of those things. And this is what T. Townsend Brown was doing, was causing distortions in the G field with electricity. And he kind of discovered that in the early days. He was an early experimenter, and he had an X-ray tube, again, back to the plasma tubes, very interesting. And he noticed that when he fired his plasma tube, his X-ray tube up with a lot of high current energy to produce X-rays, it moved a little bit, kind of slid on the bench, just like, and he was like, well, that's weird, you know, there shouldn't be any mass in there that's really, I'm putting electrons in that have no mass, it shouldn't be moving. And he developed this bifield Brown effect. And when you understand that the electromagnetic force is 10 to the 39 times greater, stronger than the gravitational force, then you start to put two and two together. It's like, aha, we can use electricity to overcome gravity. And so what he was doing was essentially that, and he experimented with a lot of high voltage apparatuses and interesting shapes like flying discs, and creating these gravity wells by using plasma and high voltage power systems all around them to create a gravity well and basically propulsion systems that we call anti-gravity, but it's not really canceling gravity, it's more using gravity to, if you had a gravity well in front of you, you're going to fall into it. And that's what these things are doing. They're creating a well that moves into it. And then therefore, when you're on board the craft, you're not going to feel the gravitational effect. So you can ride around at, you know, thousands of miles an hour, come to a dead stop, turn and go 90 degrees, no problem, because you're inside of that well, inside of the gravity field. So that's how it works. And he published patents on that. And again, he was a mysterious character that people didn't know too much about over the years. But the story of his life is quite amazing. And of course, all this technology evolved into the B2. Here they call it the $2.3 billion flying capacitor. So essentially, this is the reason why this stuff has been suppressed all this time, because it's been used for things like this anti-gravity type research and weaponry, and it gives us an upper advantage over our so-called enemies. And so this type of technology, this is the reason why you don't know about it and what it is, because back in the days, you remember everyone, when we were kids, we watched the Jetsons, and they said, oh, by the year 2000, we're all going to be flying around in flying cars. Well, we would have been if they didn't keep all this technology to themselves and not let us, not give it out to common people. So you can see his family website from his daughter. He's created this amazing website with a lot of his research work and published it all on there. And Paul Shatskin, who we met at the last Cosmic conference that we were at, has written this great book on T. Townsend Brown, and he also wrote another one on Farnsworth, who basically finalized the Crookes tube into the actual modern television set, invented the television itself from the Crookes tube, which would be another segment into this story. And all of this stuff and all the basic principles and everything that was behind the THERAPHI is really all comes from Tom Bearden. He's the one who basically, I read all his material and came up with the basic understanding of how to create the phase conjugation that he always talked about, and how to create the scalar component and time reversal waves. And he was right, and everybody, including all the academia and the disinformation agents that slandered him over the years and just said, yeah, he was crazy and a nutball. No, he was telling you the truth. And the reason why is because he understood all these things from being in the military, and he had a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics and Electronic Engineering. He was a Master's in Nuclear Engineering, graduated all the different military courses and everything like that. Something that a lot of people don't know about Tom was that he was like a old-time country singer when he was young, and he had a band and played that. But he talked about this scalar concept, and that's what everybody talks about, and without understanding what scalar really is. Well, scalar is quite simple. It's just a scale, like a number, like 5 and 10. If you have 2 5s, you have a 10. That's scalar. So temperature is scalar. So it only has a single digit. It's not a vector, and it doesn't have a combination of 2 things. It's just anything with a number, like speed. I'm going 90 miles an hour, or a distance. I traveled for 3.2 miles. Weight. That's scalar. That's what a scalar is. A scalar is just a single thing. It doesn't have 2 numbers to get it. You don't need to have 2 components to it. So a scalar field, as an example, is like a thermogram with an infrared camera. Every single point in this field is scalar because it has a single thing. There's nothing moving here. It's just a single point. So that's what a scalar is. So there's different temperatures across this field, and this is what a scalar field can be explained as. So like I said, these 3 forces, the magnetic force, the electric force, and gravitational force, we're taught, that the magnetism and electricity are 2 sides of the same coin, which they are, and they're intimately tied together. But again, this mysterious gravity thing, oh, no, we don't know anything about gravity or how it works. Well, it's intimately connected. And there's a basic underlying field behind this. What the scalar physics is all about is that how this field connects these 3 things And these three things are actually just distortions of this same force field. So in electromagnetics, we understand, the right-hand rule and current and magnetism and motion for everything that moves in the motors and things like this. But when you get into the standard model of elementary physics and particles basically doesn't connect the gravity side of things, and that's what's missing. And so we've done a really good job about breaking all these things down into their subatomic particles and how they're interacting and how they're connecting. So the standard model of physics is science's current best theory to describe the most basic building blocks of the universe. The standard model explains 3 of the 4 fundamental forces that govern the universe. 3 of the 4. So electromagnetism, the strong force, the weak force, a bunch of jibber jabber about, because there's a lot of things that are wrong, especially when you understand light. Light is really just compressions of rarefaction and compression in the ether. Just like, we have this particle vision where we got to make everything like a photon. It's got to be a thing, but it's not. These phenomena are waves upon waves that are all interacting in the ether, in the medium. So the 4th fundamental force is gravity, which is not adequately explained by the standard model. Because if you did, and if you could understand these physics, you would know how to manipulate this field. And if you can manipulate this gravity force, then you can not only have propulsion and anti-gravity and be able to move things around, but you can distort that field. Therefore, according to Einstein's theory of relativity, which he was basing it on Heaviside's mathematics, not on James Clerk Maxwell's original quaternions, because if he did base it on that, we'd have all the missing pieces of the puzzle. That's why everybody is searching for this unified theory that ties it together. Well, scalar physics is that. Because if you can manipulate the gravity, then you can manipulate time and space. And that's when we get into all the exotic technologies that everybody is kind of checking out next door and doing so. It's interesting how this all ties together. And Tom Bearden wrote about this in this book called Gravitobiology. And in here, he says that this book provides a breakthrough in understanding the mechanisms of the direct biological effects of Maxwellian electromagnetics. However, one is given great pause at the sobering implications for both good and evil. And this is why this information has been suppressed, because it can be misused and you can do bad things with it. So although secretly well known and highly developed in the Soviet Union for decades, this new technology ushers in a completely new era to the West, electrogravitobiology, or shortened gravitobiology, which infolds drastically and extends present photobiology and the whole photo communication between biophotons and what Albert Abrams and people were talking about then, and how it all applies to modern chemistry and physics. So gravitobiology is the application of a unified field theory, conception of electromagnetics and gravitation to the total energetics exchanges, 1, between a living organism and its external environment, interexchanges, and 2, inside the living organism and between, within, and among its parts and its whole intra-exchanges. So that's what's going on with the THERAPHI. That's what's happening inside. It's using this phase conjugation to create this scalar field, collapsing into 0 point, and he talked a lot about it and showed diagrams of how waves cancel each other out. You can take advantage of manipulating points in space and time. You can do things like make something appear that isn't really there, like a plane flying through the sky that really isn't there. You can make things disappear, like there is a plane flying through the sky, but you don't see it there and you can't detect it on radar or anything like that. This is all done through this scalar interferometry, basically taking 2 phases and canceling out null zones, null point in the center, And you can also send signals in, and when you send signals in, you get a bounce back in a time reversal wave that takes the information back to the source. That's what time reversal wave is. That's why we use it in the THERAPHI to reverse back to the original state and restore the entropy, to create the negative entropy. All those principles happen, and you can tap into the quantum flux of basically everything, which we know this is 0-point energy, and the amount of everything that is happening in the quantum flux of the universe is there, and this is how we tap into it and understand it, and understand a whole lot of things. So we are incredibly powerful beings. We have that. That's why we live in the duality of nature. That's why we have 2 hemispheres of our brain. Our brain can do all the same things. We can do it ourselves. We can create these phase conjugate concepts, and we can manipulate time, space, matter, everything like that ourselves. We've seen these phenomena over the years, but it also often gets, dismissed from modern science as being, woo-woo. And that's why, I'd like to thank you guys for all flipping over the rocks and digging into all this stuff, because we have an unlimited potential. And that's our greatest asset that we have to realize. And if we can just get over the conflict of everything and understand everything, we can unite everything and have all the things we could ever imagine, and be a real part of nature as it's intended to be. So thank you all for coming. Thanks. And we got a couple minutes for questions if anybody has any. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I haven't heard from him for a long time, but yeah. So Dan and I, we started talking about this, and Dan, when he published his original frequencies that were used in the THERAPHI, that's when I built it and took all the technology that I'd been working on for many years and built it into the THERAPHI. So, yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Turn off the concept of thrill, which
Yes.
was first brought up in a book called The Coming Race by Edward Buller.
Mm-hmm.
It's supposedly an energy source that can create more
Yeah.
joy.
Yes.
People are talking about inventing and using this energy that's similar to ether, maybe,
Yeah.
and using, what's your
Yeah.
perspective on that?
So Vril, so let's look at all these words. In every different culture around the world, we have these words like chi, prana, Vril. All these things are these energetic qualities and life force things that is basically all of this. It's all talking about the same things. It all boils down to these charge clusters and the accumulation of those and the negative entropy and being able to allow life to flourish. That's what it all means. So of course this underlying thing, like once you have that information and that knowledge, again, you can use it for good and do healing and do all these great things with it, but you can also use it for bad, and that's the concept. So the Vril is sort of that Aryan kind of idea of where it came from there. But it's all the same thing.